Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's session, which is using the Data Security and Protection Toolkit for the first time. I'll just wait for a couple of moments just for people to log on and make sure that everyone's able to be here from the start. So if you just bear with me for a few moments whilst we wait for that to happen. Right, okay, so let's make a start then. As I said, good afternoon, welcome to this session using the DSPT for the first time. My name is Alan Wilmot and I'm going to be running through the session on behalf of the Better Security, Better Care team. So if we can move on to the next slide, we can have a look at a few key points to make before we start. So the first thing to say is that this session is aimed at care providers who have never published the DSPT in the past, although of course everyone's welcome. And just to let you know that attendees are on mute and can't be seen. And we are recording the session so that people can have a copy of the recording. If we could just ask that if you do have any questions throughout the session, could you please use the Q&A function rather than the other functions available. And if you need to access that and you're watching it on a phone, then you need to tap the screen to see the controls, choose more and then Q&A. Any questions that we can't answer, then we will come back to you if you add your email to the Q&A. And just to reassure you that the webinar will last no longer than 1 hour, and we will make sure that there's time for questions during that time. And as I said, you will get an access to the recording and the presentation, including the links that are included in it. So moving on to the programme, what do we plan to cover? So welcome and introductions, we're well into now. We will be covering registration processes, how you register for the DSPT, and then how you complete the questions and respond appropriately to the various assertions within the toolkit. And then we'll be moving on to, once you've completed it, how do you publish? And throughout the session, we will be referring to the support that's available from the Better Security, Better Care programme. But before we start per se, just a reminder, please use the Q&A, not chat, for your questions. So before we get started, just so we can gain an understanding of who is here today, we'd be grateful if you could answer just a few questions for us. What we'd like you to do is just to respond to the poll in terms of whether you're registered on DSPT, if you've registered, have you started it, and what sort of site you are. So if you could just click on the appropriate response, that would be really helpful. Now, just give people time to respond to those, and then I can see what the sorts of responses are that we've received. So once the responses start to come in, we can then see where we're at with that. Okay, so if people have responded to all of those questions, then it would be helpful to see the results. Okay, so what have we got? We've got just over half of the audience who are already registered, and some of you don't know. Well, hopefully we'll be able to advise you how to work through that. And some of you have already started responding. So hopefully people are here as a response to having started to work through the DSPT. They now feel that they need to just check what they're doing and how they're doing it. So let's move on to the session per se. And what we're going to do is start with a quick video, which just is an introduction to the benefits of the DSPT.
Better security, better care with the Data Security and Protection Toolkit. As a care provider, you store and share important and often sensitive information. data about the people you support, their family and carers, through to staff, partners and funders. To store and share that information, whether it is on paper or digitally, all care providers must have systems in place that reduce the risk of cyber attacks and information breaches. If you don't, your business and reputation could be at risk, and you could be breaking data protection law. The Data Security and Protection Toolkit, or DSPT, is an online self-assessment tool. Kit to check your data and cyber security policies, procedures and practices, and demonstrate that you have good systems in place. This can reduce the risk of a data breach and the risk of a fine if a breach occurs, as you will be able to show the Information Commissioner's Office the steps you were taking to reduce and manage risks. All adult social care providers in England, regardless of size, service type or ownership, should complete the DSPT at least once a year. When you have completed the toolkit, you can publish and share information about the standard you have reached. So what levels can you reach on the DSPT, and what do they mean? There are currently 3 levels on the DSPT. Approaching standards means you are meeting minimum legal standards. It's a temporary stepping stone to the next level, and you will need to produce an action plan to show what you will do to get 2 standards met. Approaching standards also enables you to get NHSmail, an accredited secure email system which helps you to share confidential information with local authority, NHS and other colleagues. Standards met is the level you really need to reach. It demonstrates that you are going above basic legal requirements, and it helps you to take some proportionate measures to protect you from cyber criminals. It will help you to reassure people who use your services, their families, and your staff that you are managing their information safely. It will also enable you to answer the Care Quality Commission's questions about managing data. And if you are accessing NHS patient data or delivering services under an NHS contract, you must have reached standards met. Local authorities are also increasingly asking for the DSPT in their contracts. Standards Met opens up access to shared systems with other health organisations, including GPs, hospitals and pharmacists. These systems can improve decisions you make about someone's care and save your staff time. Finally, standards exceeded indicates that you have gone beyond required standards. So, for example, Plus in place. As a care provider, you should complete the DSPT at least once a year, but we know that not every care provider feels confident about using the toolkit. To support you, the NHS-funded Better Security, Better Care programme provides direct support, as well as useful guides, templates and a helpline to enable you to publish your DSPT and to protect the vital information you store and share. To find out more, visit www.digitalsocialcare.co.uk/Better Security, Better Care. Better Security, Better Care with the Data Security and Protection Toolkit.
Okay, so that was just a broad overview in terms of the benefits of using the DSPT. So let's have a quick look now at how it works and how it's structured. So you can see that the toolkit journey really starts with registration. So about half of you have said that you've already registered on the DSPT. And part of that registration process is setting your profile, as we'll have a look shortly. Then you complete a series of questions, and the aim is to complete all 42 questions so you can publish at standards met. And then obviously there is the review period on an annual basis at least, and I'll talk more about that shortly. However, there is another route you can take, which is to respond to the 26 questions marked mandatory. You're able then to publish at approaching standards, but that will require submitting an action plan in terms of how you plan to get to standards met. And again, the process then is that you can review every year. However, you can only publish at approaching standards once, And as things change all the time, staff, systems, organizations, etc., you need to be ensuring that your DSPT reflects how you currently operate. So it is a good idea to revisit the DSPT as and when anything changes, not necessarily just waiting until the annual review date. And we'll cover all of this in more detail as we work through, but please remember that there is a lot of support out there, as we can see in the next slide. So who's on the journey with you? Well, there is the Better Security, Better Care National Support and Resources, and there is a whole team out there willing to help you in all sorts of ways. And then there is the Digital Care Hub, which offers all sorts of guidance, policies, procedures, and templates, etc. So all support is free and official. There is online guidance and step-by-step films. There are these webinars that are there to support you, together with frequently asked questions. And as I said, there's template policies, a helpline. But more importantly, there is tailored support from 28 local support partners across the country. So your local support organisation is there to give you support in a variety of different ways, including webinars, one-to-ones, and visits, etc., in person. So there is no excuse for not knowing how to complete the DSPT. The support is there to help you. And another key reason for completing the DSPT is CQC. So if we can move forward to the CQC slide, one of the changes that has come through with CQC's new approach is that they have now specifically included the DSPT, data security and cybersecurity under their new framework, specifically under well-led, under the governance, management and sustainability section. So they are increasingly looking at what organizations are doing and how they're doing it in order to ensure that the rights of the service users, etc., in relation to these areas is upheld. So that's the context. Let's move on now to look at how you can complete the DSPT. And the first step, as we saw in the graph earlier, is registration on the DSPT. And so the first thing you need to do is to register. And in order to register, you need to find your ODS code. All organizations that are registered with CQC will have an ODS code. And that's used by the NHS to provide each health and social care organisation with a unique identifier that means that they are bona fide and that they are registered with CQC. If you're not sure about your ODS code, I'll run through that in a bit more detail shortly. But if you need help, there is the Exeter Help Desk telephone number on the slide there, which can help you. You will need to choose which ODS code to register with, because all organisations are allocated two codes, an HQ code and a location code. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But once you register using your name and providing an email. They will then send you an email with a link link across to the DSPT registration portal, and there you will be asked to set up your password. So if we can then move forward to ODS codes, we'll just touch a bit more on that. So as I said, each service will be provided with two codes, an HQ code and a location code. If you are a single care home or a home care agency with one CQC registered office, then please register on the DSPT with your V code, not the HQ code. So it will be the actual location code, usually starting with a V, that will be required to registration process. And you can ignore the HQ code if you are a single organization. However, if you have multi-sites within your organization, so for example, a group of care services that share the same policies and procedures, it is possible to register on the DSPT using the HQ code or the A code, and then you can use that submission on the DSPT to cover all of the sites in one go. So if you are an organization, as we'll see on the next slide, that has multiple sites, then it can be a bit more complicated. So if you've got one parent organisation and a number of separate branches, different types of service, etc., so you might be providing care homes and home care, then it gets more complicated because it relates to how you're registered with CQC and how you're registered at Companies House, etc. So it would be advisable to seek advice from the help desk. Again, the number and the email information is on the slide there for you to inquire how best to work with that. And it may be possible that you have to complete more than one DSPT, depending upon how the organisation is structured. So if we move to looking at changes that have happened to make it easier for multiple site organisations, if you're registered with the HQ code, when you log in, it will show you all the linked sites to that particular HQ code, and it will give you the opportunity to tick the ones that you wish to publish for. Also, it would be advisable to add your registered managers of the various locations as viewers or auditors of the DSPT, and you can do that via the admin tab, which is on the dark blue bar just above who would you like to publish for. And then again, you will still need to revisit and republish each year and ensure that all the sites that you want included within that publication have been ticked within that area. And again, if you're not sure of ODS codes, then to find your ODS code, on the slide there is a link across to the ODS portal where you can carry out an organisation search, or you can search for ODS portal within your browser and then choose organisation and practitioner search. And if you can't find your code or you're not sure which one to use, again, Exeter Help Desk will be able to unravel that again. Because there are sometimes some complications if you've cancelled a registration and re-registered, etc., etc. But for most people, it's a fairly straightforward process to find the relevant ODS code. Bearing in mind, you need to be just checking whether or not you're using the HQ code or the location code. Okay, so where do you start with the DSPT? Well, the first thing to do is to actually get onto the site itself. And the link to the DSPT toolkit is on the left-hand side of the slide there. And then you'll land on this page here, which you can see we've circled two areas there. The first of those is an organisation search. And quite often it's a good idea before you register on the DSPT to check whether or not you've been previously registered or whether or not the toolkit has been published in the past for your organisation. And once you're certain that it hasn't, and you're not pre-registered, then you can use the register button as indicated here to register for the first time. But again, if you have any difficulty within the registration process, there is support available to you there. Once you click on the register button, it will take you through to a series of questions. And the first of those is to set your organisation profile. So it will ask what type of organisation you are. We would suggest that for most organisations, you need to be choosing social care as your, and the main reason I'm suggesting that is that the DSPT applies to all sorts of organisations such as hospitals, GPs, etc. If you choose social care as your organisation, it will strip out the questions that are not relevant to your organisation. The next thing it will do is ask you a series of questions around key roles in your organisation. So it will ask about your data protection officer, your CIRO, Caldecott Guardian, information governance lead. If we can just go back one, please. These questions are not essential. If you're not sure or you don't have these roles within your organisation, then it's perfectly okay to leave the questions blank. It won't prevent you from continuing to complete the DSPT. Next slide, please. So it's also possible as you're setting up your organization's profile, you can set up other users, as I mentioned earlier about allowing various managers in other locations to be viewers or editors. The person that registers will be the administrator by default, and they have the ability to manage users, add or edit evidence, and publish the DSPT. But it is also possible to have additional members who can have access to your site, and they can add or edit evidence. So, for example, if you have an IT support department, they might be wanting to answer the questions around the IT areas. And if you just want people to be able to see what responses you've given, then you can add them as a viewer only. If you do add people, they will receive an email link. And it's important that they are expecting the link, because the link will expire within 24 hours of them receiving it. Okay, so the registration process is setting up an administrator, answering the organization profile questions, and then setting up who you want to have access to your toolkit. But there is support available. So if we look at the next slide, we can see where you can get help with the registration process. So there's a couple of useful links there on the right. And then there is reference there to the 28 local support organizations that I referred to earlier. So again, there's plenty of support out there to help you on the journey. So at this point, I just think I'm going to pause. And if we could move on to the question slide, just give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have so far in terms of ODS codes and the registration process and setting your organization profile.
There's no more questions so far.
Brilliant. Okay, right. So if we move on then to what you actually have to do in order to complete the DSPT questions, there are a few things that are worth knowing. So if we look at the next slide, we can see that most importantly, the answers that you put into your DSPT are not public. So the only people who see the responses that you give to the DSPT are the people that you give access to in terms of the other users, because it is a self-assessment. The whole purpose of the DSPT is to provide you with the issues that you need to be aware of, and to give you opportunity to demonstrate that you are satisfied that you meet those requirements. So your answers are not published. The only thing that's published is the DSPT status that you achieve based on your self-assessment. However, it's important to remember that it's not a tick box exercise, that the aim is that you work through it to achieve what you need to achieve within your organization, but it does rely on your integrity. So you use the answers and comment sections to record the information, and using the comment section could be helpful, because that could help with future DSPT publications, particularly if it's not you that's completing it in the future. So what do you see if you register as a social care organization? So there is the social care view. So assuming that you've selected social care organization in your profile, this is what you will see. And it is a series of questions that have been extracted from the full DSPT, just relating to what social care providers are required to do and how they're required to do it. Some of the questions are marked mandatory, and they're the ones that you would need to respond to if you are publishing at approaching standards. And questions that you answer will be marked as completed down the right-hand side of the column there. Again, it's important to be aware that there's no specific order to completing the DSPT. You can start anywhere and move back and forth amongst the questions. You can do a few questions and come out and go back in again, etc. The system will auto-save at regular intervals. And the DSPT is divided into 4 sections. And within each of those 4 sections, there are a number of questions or evidence items. And the types of questions within them are one of 3 types. So there is a text box question, which asks you to type in a response. There is a simple tick box question, which just asks you to confirm a particular area. Or the third type of question is where you're given a series of options. One of those is to upload a document, but there is also the option to enter text by clicking on the blue enter text link that's within the question. So there's only the 3 types of questions, and there are the 4 sections with a number of questions within each. So if we look at one particular section here, staffing and roles, which is the first one, we can see that it's indicating here that if you click on an evidence item, which is the blue text, that will expand the question, and that will give you the opportunity to see what the detailed guidance is in relation to that question. And it will give you the opportunity to respond in one of the three ways that we've been talked about. So as I said, the questions are grouped in 4 headings, as we can see here. So we've got staffing and roles, policies and procedures, data security, IT systems and devices. And you can see that there are varying numbers of questions within each of those sections, and that there are a different number of questions depending on whether you're going for approaching standards or standards met. So in total, approaching standards has 26 questions, standards met has 42. So again, if we move forward, looking at what the questions cover, the first of the section, staffing and roles, it talks about who has responsibility for this area of work. So in relation to the responsibility, I would suggest that you need to decide who's going to be responsible for data protection and cybersecurity in your organization. And that's the person that needs to be entered into this particular question area. In relation to staff records and contracts, it asks about, do you know what staff you have? Do you know what they do and what their areas of responsibility are? And have you got something in their contracts about their response to keeping data safe, etc.? In relation to training, the DSPT asks 4 questions. And we quite often get asked what training do staff need. And that will depend on their role, which is why it's so important to know who you've got, what they do, what their responsibility is. And it asks whether or not you carry out a training needs analysis covering all staff in order to be able to ascertain what training they need. And it's important that you recognise that all staff require some level of training on data protection and cyber security, and that includes from board members, owners, right the way through to frontline staff, etc. And within the questions for approaching standards, data protection and cyber security must form part of the induction programme. If you're going for standards met, then there is the expectation that that training will be ongoing for all staff. So let's have a look at the staff record section and just talk through one question as an example. So obviously it's important to keep an up-to-date record of your staff and volunteers if you have them. And so the first of the questions it asks is, does your organisation have an up-to-date record of staff and volunteers and their roles? This may seem a bit like a redundant question. So the toolkit asks about whether you have this list, but it's important that you understand the level of access that staff should have and where there should be restrictions in terms of what information they have. Now, you don't have to upload your records to the toolkit, but you do have to have them in place. And you can use the comments box to describe where the records are kept, for example, in the office, in the cabinet, on the computer, wherever they may be, so that whoever completes the toolkit in the future will have an idea of where that might be. So where does this question particularly fit within the toolkit? If we can have a look at the next slide, we can see that 411 is the last of the questions in the staffing and roles section. And if you click on the blue text, as I indicated earlier, it will open up the full question. And here you can see that this particular question is a simple tick box. So does your organisation have an up-to-date record of staff and volunteers? So if the answer is yes, you would just click on the box on the top left of the question there. And again, if you wanted to, you could write in the comments section to indicate where that record is. And then once you've completed that, you can click on save and it will show as completed within the toolkit. So if we have a look at an example of where that question has been completed. So does your organisation have an up-to-date record? Yes. Comments, they're contained in the HR files, both in hard copies and electronic version, which is on Google Drive, etc., etc. So again, just an indicator as to anyone visiting the toolkit in the future would know where to look. Okay, so if we then move on to the next element, we can see question 115, which asks who has responsibility for data security and protection, and how has this responsibility been formally assigned? So this relates to what I was saying earlier about identifying who carries the can for data and cyber security in your organization. And that's what this is asking you to do, is just to identify somebody who takes ownership of this area for your organization. So you can see that in bold at the top is the actual question itself. And then underneath that, there is a tooltip that gives best practice advice. And this is really what you need to do. And then in most of the questions, there is often a link in blue to further help. So in this particular question, it will take you through to the digital care hub, where there is guidance around the roles and responsibilities within data and cyber security. So to respond to all of this, once you're happy, you would simply type your answer into the text box where it says write your answer here. And again, the comments box is optional, but it's there for your use in terms of future use of DSPT, etc. Just one point I want to make before we move on from this slide is that if you type your answer to the question in the comments box, the system won't recognize the question as being responded to, so it won't show as completed. So make sure in any of the text questions that you type into the top box in order to make sure that the question is shown as completed. So you'd then click on save and move forward to the next question. So if we can move forward again, please. Question 321. This is where it starts talking about training again. So I mentioned earlier that all staff will require at induction training, awareness training on data protection and cybersecurity. If you want to complete standards met, then you will need to respond to this question, asking whether at least 95% of everyone in your organization has completed training in the data security and protection area in the last 12 months. So what this is indicating is that you should see data and cyber security as part of your mandatory ongoing training on an annual basis. And we're frequently asked about what training is available for staff. So Better Security, Better Care have developed some really useful resources. So there is a free e-learning course that I would highly recommend for all staff working in care. It is easily accessible. Each of the modules are only 15 to 20 minutes. It's based on case scenarios that are very relatable. And it is for anybody, it's free. And if staff complete this, they will be compliant with question 321 on the data protection toolkit. You can see the 4 modules that are available there. I won't go into that in any more detail at this stage, but there are other resources available from Better Security, Better Care. And if we move forward to the next slide, we can see what that is. And that's the manager's discussion tool and a quiz for staff. So there is a simple multiple choice quiz for frontline staff, and I would suggest that that's a really useful tool in a couple of ways. It can be used as part of your supervision with staff, but it's also a really good tool for checking staff's learning and application following training to make sure they understand the areas that they need to understand. And then there's the manager's discussion tool on the left-hand side, which is a really useful way of working with staff to check that people understand their responsibilities and their duties in relation to data and cybersecurity within your organization. So if we then move on to look at the second section within the toolkit, policies, procedures, what do those questions cover? Well, it covers the Information Commissioner's Office registration. So you do need to check that your organization is registered with the ICO. In terms of policies, you need to have up-to-date data protection policies. And that's all about how you keep the data that you hold safe and secure, and how that you check that people are compliant with the policies and procedures you've got by auditing or doing spot checks, etc. it asks about the national data opt-out. Now that's relatively new. It was introduced in July 22, so it is now a legal requirement for all health and social care registered organisations to be compliant with the national data opt-out. And this is to stop health and social care organisations from sharing confidential information for research and planning purposes. And so you need to be familiar with that, and you need to make sure that your requirements under the national data opt-out are included within your various policies, procedures and privacy notice, etc. Holding and sharing information is about how you are GDPR compliant, and it's about privacy notices again. Retaining records is about having a retention schedule, so how long do you keep records for? And then disposal is about what do you do with them once you no longer require to have them. And then the list of suppliers is about having a list of external suppliers that handle your personal information. So that could be care planning system suppliers, IT support, accountants, DBS, HR, payroll, etc. And you need to have a list of the systems or services that they provide. So let's have a look at one of the questions within this particular section, and we'll have a look at the Information Commissioner's Office question here. So registration, as I said, with the ICO is a legal requirement for every organisation that processes personal information unless they are exempt as a small charity. And that's pretty unlikely for most social care providers. If your organisation is not already registered, you should register as a matter of urgency, because the ICO can fine you up to £4,000 if you don't. And you can check whether or not you're registered on the ICO website. And you can see under further reading on the left-hand side of the slide there, it says search the register, and you can search by postcode, organisation name, etc. So what does the question actually ask? So it simply asks what your registration number is. So you would be required to type in your registration number. You may want to put in comments where the certificate that you received from the ICO is kept, etc. And then you would click on save and the question is complete. And if we can look at a completed question here, we can see that the registration number usually starts with the Z, and that's all you need to do is to either just type in the number or give some explanation there, and again the comments box. Fairly straightforward, not difficult, as most organisations should already be registered, etc. However, should you, as you work through the toolkit, find that you don't have a particular policy, or you want to check your policies against another policy to see that you've covered everything, then there is further support available. And there are template policies available on the Digital Care Hub. So for approaching standards, the required policies are listed there on the left-hand side, and I'm not going to work through all of those. For standards met, there are some additional policies that you will require. And then there is some recommended documentation available and some templates in terms of an incident reporting form, mobile devices assignment form, smartphone policy template, and a template suppliers list. So if, as you're working through the toolkit, as I said, you find you haven't got something in place, all of the resources are available there for you to be able to find them. So if we then move on to section 3 of the toolkit, what do the questions cover? Data breaches. So we need to be thinking about what is a data breach. We need to be thinking about what is a near miss. And we need to think about what your plan should cover in terms of your business continuity planning, etc. So 3 main areas. Data breaches. Does your organisation have a system in place to report data breaches? Well, you need to make sure that as part of staff training and awareness that they know what a data breach is. And in my experience, not all staff fully understand that a data breach is not just about confidentiality. Physical security is about the building security and where you keep paper records, locked filing cabinets, etc., etc. And business continuity is about making sure that you've got elements within your business continuity plan to cover should there be a problem with systems and processes that might be digital, etc. So if we move on to section 4, IT systems and devices, which is the one that, again, in my experience, providers are often a little bit more wary about. But I would suggest that you don't need to be wary. It's fairly straightforward. And if you use an IT supplier, then there's nothing wrong with asking them. So look at the question, find out what it's asking, and then pass that on to your IT supplier for the responses. So it talks about people and their access to information. And I alluded to this earlier on, that people are only allowed to have access to the information they are required in order to perform the duties that they're employed for, and nothing else. So it's about that awareness in terms of who should have access to what. Then this section is about best practice password use, making sure that staff are aware of the fact that sharing passwords, etc., is not advisable, and using best practice in terms of establishing passwords. It's about the backup processes. So where you use digital systems, how do you back that up, and how do you make sure that's accessible should there be a problem and you need to reinstall, etc. How do you protect devices? And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. What technical setup and support have you got? And what documentation should your suppliers have in terms of their accreditation around data and cyber security? So as I said, you may need to just check with your IT suppliers if you're not sure, but most of the questions should be easily answered by most organizations. And then if we have a look at what's new in the IT systems and devices for this year, there is a new question, and it is a mandatory question, so it's required at both approaching standards and standards met. And this is around multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Basically what we're talking about here is MFA being one of the most effective ways to protect data and accounts from unauthorized access. So with the increase in threats to cybersecurity, etc., there is an increased awareness that we need to be building in better protection for our systems, such as our email, digital social care records, etc. And MFA is considered to be the most effective means that we have at the moment of protecting that. There is guidance on MFA on the Digital Care Hub, but if we then move forward to the next slide, we can see what we're actually talking about. So it's a way to make sure that your systems are much safer because it adds extra steps to prove that it's you trying to log in. And that's usually a text message, email code, fingerprint, or authenticator app, such as Microsoft, as you can see on the right-hand side there. And we've all done this, usually when we're doing online banking, or increasingly other programs are asking for multi-factor authentication. And it is all about ensuring that we only allow people to have access who should have access to the information that we've got. So if we look at the next slide, we can see what we need to be doing. So we need to be reviewing our current systems and speaking with suppliers around whether or not multi-factor authentication is enabled. We need to be looking and auditing our systems and processes to see if there are any potential issues. So are staff sharing devices or logins, etc. Because we need to make sure that that practice stops in order to be able to ensure the safety of the information we've got. Then we need to be thinking about when might MFA be appropriate and when might it not be appropriate. So if we've already got other significant controls in place, then we may not need to think about it. And it's about thinking about your organization's balance of security versus usability. And any systems that you don't use MFA for, you need to be just recording that process with your senior managers, etc., and explain why you don't need to think about MFA. So, for example, if you've already got other significant controls in place, etc. So, next slide, please. If we can look at this whole issue of security versus usability, because what we don't want to do is to make it too cumbersome for staff to be able to access the systems that we're using. We don't want to add too many layers. What we want to do is to identify the appropriate level of security for each system you use based on the nature of the data that's within it. So how sensitive is that data, and does it need maximum protection, etc. So wherever possible, wherever it's appropriate, then we should be implementing MFA for all individual logins to those systems that we're using. And if you're not sure about how to do that or whatever, then you may want to contact your local support organisation, your software supplier, your IT supplier, etc., all of whom will be familiar with what we're talking about here. And there is further guidance available from the Digital Care Hub. So on their website, there is information around staff and workforce, IT and software suppliers, retention and disposal of information, how to improve your security, and what to do about mobile devices, etc. And on the right-hand side of the slide here, we can see the contact links that will take you through to the various support that's out there. So assuming that we've now worked through all of the questions on the toolkit, we should be in a position where we can publish at the appropriate level. So again, there will be two levels at which you can publish: approaching standards, standards met. The ideal is to go for standards met first time. However, if you're publishing at approaching standards, then you will have responded to the 26 mandatory questions. And if once you've completed all of the mandatory questions, at the bottom of the screen will appear the blue button that is indicated here with the arrow, where it says publish approaching standards assessment. And you can see down on the bottom right there that will then open up a box which asks you to download, complete and upload an action plan to show how you're going to complete the rest of the questions. And just a reminder here that you can only publish at approaching standards once. However, if you have completed all of the questions, then you can publish at standards met. So you've completed all 42 questions, bearing in mind that the only thing that's going to be published is your DSPT status and the date, not your responses to the questions. And if you have completed all 42 questions, then it will state down at the bottom there, publish assessment. However, if when you click on publish assessment, you get a screen like this, then it means that something has gone wrong. Either one of the questions hasn't been answered, or you've perhaps put your response in the comments box rather than the text box, but the system will tell you where the problem is, and you can review and revisit that particular question or those particular questions in order to correct that, and then again go back to the publish assessment button at the bottom of the screen. So what happens if you're publishing as an HQ assessment? So we talked earlier about being able to publish using the HQ ODS code. For those of you that have registered with your HQ code, then you can view the branches where the arrow is indicating here. It says view branches. If you click on that, it will open up a drop-down box with all of the branches that are linked to this particular HQ, and you would just tick the ones that you want to be associated with this publication. So moving forward, if you need more support on publishing your DSPT, there are links on this particular slide that will take you to guidance on publishing for the first time and how you can contact your local support organisation should you need to. Once you've published, it is possible to export your assessment to Excel. So if you go into the DSPT and click on download assessment as indicated by the arrow there, the Excel file will download onto your device straight away. It's also possible to save your published DSPT as a PDF. So again, go back into your toolkit and click on view previous publications, and then it will list all of the published entries of DSPT. If you then click on the view details of the one that you want to save as a PDF, you can then download that as a PDF by using Control and P to save as a PDF, or presumably you could print it depending on what you choose on your printer options there. If we could just go back one slide, I just want to point out one thing that I didn't mention, is that under the view details of previous publications, it will also have a download certificate link. So that's where you can download the certificate that proves that you have published and at what level you've published, etc. Thank you. If we can move forward again, please. Few tips in terms of once you've published. I would just want to make the point that you shouldn't be shy about letting people know that your organization is serious about data protection and cyber security. It's really important. So tell managers, tell your branches, download your certificate, add your DSPT status to your website. Increasingly, it's relevant in terms of any bids that you might be making for work, etc. So tell your commissioners, tell the NHS partners and your IT suppliers that you have completed the DSPT, that you are compliant, and that your organisation is serious about this. So moving forward, just a few points around what we need to be doing. So that's keeping your DSPT up to date throughout the year. That makes it easier to republish. So if you change systems such as going to digital social care records, update your records as you go. Ensure that managers and staff understand what is expected of them in this area. So use the manager's discussion tool and the staff quiz in order to ensure they know what they should be doing. Enable managers to access their information by giving them viewer rights on the DSPT, etc. And maybe print out the documents and the related policies and procedures in a manual, particularly useful for CQC. So just to summarize, I would say data protection should not be a once a year issue. So while you are required to complete the DSPT on an annual basis, the DSPT is not the end goal. It's all about a safe and secure service upholding the rights of the individuals you support. So we should be encouraging data protection and cyber security in our processes and systems by design and default, making it a norm in our organization. So what do you need to do next? But if you haven't already done so, register on the DSPT. If you need to, contact your local support partner or go to the Digital Care Hub. For larger providers where it might be a bit more complicated, you might want to contact the Digital Care Hub around that. Check out the guidance that's on the Digital Care Hub. No harm in having a look at what's out there and see how it relates to what you've already got. And start to answer the questions on the DSPT, bearing in mind that you can return to it at any time. You don't need to do it all at once. So, last opportunity, any questions that you might have in relation to anything that we've covered so far?
Yes, we did have one question.
Yeah.
Is it a requirement to have the ICO certificate displayed?
No.
Okay, good, thank you.
No, I mean, but it doesn't do any harm, because again, it's about demonstrating that your organization's serious about data protection and cyber security. But you don't have to display it, so long as you're registered. That's the requirement.
Okay, fantastic. And that was the last of the questions.
Okay, so just one last thing if we could ask of you before we close for the afternoon. Again, if you could just respond to the questions within the poll, it would be really helpful for us to get some feedback in terms of the session. And whilst you're doing that, if I could just say that it's been a pleasure working with you this afternoon. And I hope that should you have any questions or any queries, please let us know if we haven't responded or covered the area that you wanted. Has the poll come up? Right, well, I can't actually see the poll.
Bear with me, sorry.
Are we having technical issues here, Rihanna?
There we go.
There we go. Brilliant. Right, so again, if you just click on the appropriate response, we'll just give people a chance to do that. And then we'll see how we've done this afternoon before we allow you to go and do something constructive. The first two questions are of particular interest to me in terms of how confident you feel and how likely you are to complete. So I'll be interested to see what your responses are here. Right. Oh, so 93% say it's increased your confidence. Excellent. 70% likely. 97% of you are very likely or likely to complete the DSPT. Excellent. That's superb. Well, please bear in mind that should you, as you're working through it, have any queries, any questions, contact your local support organisation. They're ready and waiting to help you in any way you would like to be helped with that. So if we could just move forward to the last of the slides, it remains for me to say thank you very much for attending this afternoon. You will all get a copy of the slides, etc. And again, if you need any help, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you all very much for coming this afternoon.